This video goes over adding and subtracting integers. Before we get into the actual math, we need to go over a couple of definitions. So the first one is a natural number. These are sometimes called the counting numbers because they were used for counting. They're usually represented with an n, and they represent positive integers. So 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way up. A whole number is the natural numbers plus 0. They're usually represented with a W, and they start at 0 and then go up from there. There are no negative numbers, and there are no decimals in those two sets. Okay? An integer is a positive number, a negative number, or 0. There are no decimals and no fractions. Integers we usually represent with an I, and they go from negative infinity to 0, and then up to positive infinity. So what we want to do next is fill in the blank with a less than or greater than symbol. Remember, the bigger part of the opening always goes to the bigger number. The bigger number is always defined as a number that is more positive. So what you might want to do here is pause the video, try and fill in the blanks on your own, and then double check with me to make sure that you're on the right track. So here, my 3 is positive and minus 5 is negative. So 3 is the larger number. Same thing in B, my 7 is positive. The other number, minus 2, is negative. So the 7 must be larger. C is a little bit trickier because they are both negative. The minus 6 is closer to 0 or more positive. So that means that minus 6 is the larger number. In D, same thing. I've got two negative numbers. The minus 1 is closer to 0. You can also check on the number line that's down below. So minus 1 is the larger number. And the last one, 0 and minus 3. 0 is more positive, so that is the larger number. There are lots of different ways to add and subtract integers. I'm going to show you two. You can use whichever method you feel most comfortable with. So the first way to do it is by using a number line. This is a very visual way, and it allows you to count the hops as you're going here, or count the hops as you're going to the left. If you are going to the right, that represents adding or an increase. And if you're going to the left, that represents subtracting or a decrease. So let's look at some examples here. My first one is 4 plus 2. So that means that I'm going to start at 4. I'm adding 2, so I'm going to the right. 1, 2. So this would equal 6. Now I've got a negative number to start with, minus 2. So on my number line, I'm going to start at minus 2. I'm adding 3, so now I'm going to go 3 to the right. 1, 2, 3. And this equals positive 1. Example C, now I've got 2 minus 5. So I'm going to start at positive 2. I'm subtracting, so I'm going to go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the way to minus 3. Next one is minus 1, minus 4. Switch colors here. So now I'm in red. So I've got minus 1. That first number is where I'm starting at on my number line, and I'm going to go 4 to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, which gives me minus 5. Next one, start at minus 3, and I'm going to go to the right 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to give me positive 3. The last one, I'm starting at 0, and then I'm subtracting. So I'm going to the left 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which gives me -5. The other way that you can add and subtract integers is by using the rules. So this is a little bit more of an analytical way to do it. Sometimes can make it easier if the number line is challenging. So the two rules that we have are if they have the same sign, what you're going to do is keep the sign and add the numbers. Rule number 2 is if they have different signs, you're going to keep the sign from the larger number and subtract the numbers. So let's do some examples to see how those rules work. So same sign, keep the sign and add the numbers. Rule 2, if they have different signs, keep the sign from the larger number and subtract the numbers. So let's do a couple of examples here. So here I've got +3 and +8. My sign is the same, so I'm going to keep the sign, and then I'm going to add 8 and 3, which gives me 11. My next example here, now they have different signs, so I'm going to keep the sign from the larger number, which is -5, and I'm going to subtract them. So 5 minus 3. Now, technically, this is not the larger number as in greater than, less than. It's just the bigger numerical value. So 5 is bigger than 2. So that is the sign that I'm going to keep. But if you were to do a greater than, less than symbol, 2 is actually greater than -5, which is a little bit confusing. Okay, hope that helps. The next one, example C, my signs are the same. So I'm going to keep the sign, which is negative, and I'm going to add the numbers, 3 plus 6, which will give me -9. Example D, again, I've got different signs. So I've got a positive and a negative. My 8 is the bigger one numerically if I ignore the signs. So that is the sign that I'm going to keep. And then I'm going to subtract the numbers, 8 minus 4. Now what you might want to do here, like I said above, pause the video, try the next couple on your own, and then check in with me to see if you are getting the right answer. Here I've got -7 and +8, or -7 plus 8. I've got different signs. I'm going to keep the sign from the 8, and I'm going to subtract the numbers, which gives me +1. F, I've got +11, -5, different signs. I'm going to keep the sign from the larger number and subtract, and 11 minus 5 is 6. G, I've got different signs again. I'm going to keep the sign from the 8 because that is the bigger number when you look at it, the 0 compared to the 8, and I'm going to subtract. 8 minus 0 is 8. Example H, I've got different signs. I'm going to keep the sign from the 6, which is negative, and subtract. 6 minus 0 is 6. Now our last 3 examples are a little bit more complicated. They've got some more numbers, but that's okay. I'm going to do it in groups. So I'm going to look at my first 2, -3 plus 2. I've got different signs. I'm going to keep the sign from the 3, and I'm going to subtract the numbers. 3 minus 2 is 1. Then I'm going to write down the part that I haven't dealt with right underneath. Now I'm going to look at my next pair, -1 and 5. I'm going to keep the sign from the larger number, which is 5, and I'm going to subtract the numbers. 5 minus 1 is 4. And then I'm going to write down my last part that I haven't done anything with. Now I've got the same sign, so I'm going to keep the sign and add the numbers, giving me my final answer of positive 8. Last two, couple more pairs, but here we go. So minus 3 and positive 4, I'm going to keep the sign from my bigger number, which is the 4, and I'm going to subtract, which gives me positive 1, and then I'm going to write down the next part that I haven't done anything with. My next pair, plus 1 minus 5, I'm going to keep the sign from the larger number, and I'm going to subtract, which gives me minus 4, and then I've got minus 2, plus 5, plus 7. I'm going to keep going. Minus 4, minus 2, the signs are the same, so I keep the sign and I add the numbers, plus 5, plus 7. My next pair, the signs are different, so I keep the sign from the larger number and I subtract the numbers. My last pair, the signs are still different, so I keep the sign from the larger number and I subtract. Last example here, same way that I did example J, keep the sign from the larger number and subtract. Write down the remaining numbers here. Look at my first two. I'm going to keep the sign from the larger number and subtract and write down my remaining numbers. Keep the sign from the larger number, that's 7, and subtract. Minus 4 and minus 2, the signs are the same, so I keep the sign and add the numbers. And then finally, different signs, so I keep the sign from the larger number and subtract. Those are a lot of steps to show. As we're getting comfortable with adding and subtracting integers, I'll ask you to show all those steps. As we progress, you will have to show fewer and fewer steps to get to your final answer. These are all questions that you should be able to do without a calculator. The worksheet that goes along with it has some extra practice for you.